Hey yogis and aspiring yogis and anyone who happened to fumble into this video and like to learn more. Today we're going over downward dog, proper alignment, and common mistakes. Of downward facing dog or Adho Mukha Svanasana. This is a video in a series where we're kind of unpacking downward dog a little bit more. There was another video on downward dog through the lens of Ayurveda. There's another video on the benefits and contraindications with downward dog. And today the video is going to be on how to properly do downward dog and common misalignments with downward dog. So today I'm going to be using my mat to kind of go over it, but first I'm just going to talk about what the alignment should be. So what we're going for is an upside down V shape with our bodies. This is a very active posture. It is commonly kind of accidentally thrown into the category of a resting pose, but it's not a resting pose in the sense of you're resting. It's more like a recovery pose. So it's easy to mix them up. They're synonyms, so you would think it's the same thing. But if you think of it as working out and you're doing cardio, if you're doing mountain climbers, plank jacks, burpees, and then you were going to go into a plank, your plank is your recovery. You're recovering in that pose, but you're still very active. Your muscles are really engaged and you're still very present. But you have your time to kind of take a deep breath and just connect back with your breath and kind of let your heart rate come down a little bit. So when you're in a vinyasa class or like a more intense power yoga or a strength yoga, a lot of times you're doing like half a breath of movement where you're inhaling, or if you're doing like a Surya Namaskar, you're doing like an inhaling up, exhaling folding, inhale halfway lift, exhale coming down, inhale plank, exhale chaturanga, up dog, and then you're going to come into your downward facing dog. And usually when you come to downward facing dog, you take a few breaths there. Some are usually between 3 or 5. So it really helps you kind of recover, catch your breath, come back into that moment. But it's not to be confused with resting. You're still very much engaged in this pose. You still really want to be using your muscles and make sure your alignment is correct. So we'll start from the feet up because it's a little bit easier that end. So you want to think about your feet grounding into your mat. Now your heels do not have to touch your mat, but you want to think about pressing your heels towards the mat. In many ways, it actually makes it easier for someone who can't touch the mat because you're actively thinking about pressing your heels to the mat. So you also have to remember, if you are flexible and your feet are flat on the mat, shifting your weight to the heels. So think about even lifting up your toes, and you can even lift up your toes if you're just on the ball of your foot, because you really want to think about pressing your hamstrings back, pressing your hips back. So you want to have that weight shift into the heel of your foot, not into the front of your foot, because your energy is supposed to be going that way, not collapsing into your shoulders. So one of the key things foundationally, think of your feet, your heels either on the ground or not, are pressing down. So make sure you don't kind of fall into the pattern of if your feet are flat. I'm so guilty of this because I'm flexible and I can get my feet flat. Sometimes I'm just like lazy in the pose, and then I'm like, no, what am I doing? And then I'll feel it in my wrists, I'll feel it at like so much more in my upper body. So you want to keep pressing that weight into your heels so you can keep pressing your hamstrings back. That's going to help you take that pressure off and get the proper alignment. Coming up, your knees, this is where it's your comfort. You want to make sure you're in a nice straight line. Your knees aren't bending out to your sides or bending in, but your knees can bend. It's just a matter of your flexibility, your body. You know, we might be yoga teachers, we might know more anatomy, but no one knows your body better than you do. So always go with your comfort. If you feel you need to have a slight bend in your knees, have that bend in your knees. If your legs are straight, you want to think about lifting your kneecaps. So it's kind of like this engagement in your quadricep muscles. that lifts your kneecaps because your rectus femoris muscle, it's a muscle, your main quadricep that comes from your hip, it crosses your hip, crosses the hip joint and the knee joint, and it crosses literally straight over the kneecap. So when you contract it, it's going to lift the kneecap up. That'll protect your knee, but also it helps with reciprocal inhibition, which is a type of stretch. When you're engaging your quads, it's going to naturally, in your nervous system, cause your hamstrings to relax, and that's what you're stretching in this asana. So it's important to think about engaging your quads, lifting the kneecaps, so you can get that extra relaxation in the hamstrings. So that's your knees. Coming up to the hips now. You want to think about, it's kind of a weird cue, and one of my teachers recently uses it, but it's kind of perfect. You think about like almost like spreading your butt. It's kind of weird, but that is what's happening as you're pressing your hips up back, the same way you would in cow pose when you're doing cat-cow. The way your like hips kind of lift up and your butt kind of spreads, you want to think about that happening with your butt. It's kind of spreading, it's a little awkward, but that's what's happening. So you're thinking about your hips are pressing up and back the same way they do in cow pose when you're doing cat-cow. You're lifting your hips up and back, and it kind of naturally spreads the butt. And you really want to think about that back and up. So those are the main things happening with your lower body. That's going to help with lower back tension. It's going to help with hamstring tension. It's going to help with calves, ankles, and feet even. That's really just the entire posterior chain, and then it's going to come up into the upper body. Before we move into the proper alignment for the upper body, I'm going to come into common mistakes with your lower body. Your heel's not touching the ground, that's fine. This is the common mistake of you're not still pressing your heels towards the ground, whether your feet are flat or not. Always press. That's a common mistake, I would say. Your knees, it's not a mistake to bend them. Just, of course, the possibility of bending your knees out or in, but you don't see that very often. Just something to be conscious of, and always think about engaging and lifting up your kneecaps. That would be the other possible mistake. And then your hips, a lot of people just kind of get lazy with it, and they're not actively really pressing up and back. So it's not necessarily that I see people doing it wrong, I just see people being lazy. So don't be lazy, keep it as an active pose, press your hips back, lift them up, and spread your butt. Now coming into your upper body. So it's going to be from your hips up. So it's really common if your lower back is tight, you'll get an arching in your back because you're straightening your legs and your legs are not ready. This is that common mistake. Bend your knees if your back is arching. You want to be able to have that straight line in your back. That's more important than straight in your legs. Bend your knees, get that, release that tension so you can get that line in your back. And slowly, as you do this and stretch your hamstrings and stretch your lower back, you're going to get that range of motion. It's going to be fine. So I can also link in this video below, I'll link some videos that'll help prep you for downward dog with lower body. And I also have one for upper body, like mobility, that overhead reach, which we're going to get to in a second. So with your lower back, if it's arching and you're not getting that nice long line, you want to always think about bend your knees to fix that. You don't want your back to arch in either direction. You don't want to kind of have that like lower back caving in, or you don't want your whole back to be a C. So you really want to focus on getting a nice straight line with your spine, usually bending your knees. That's what's going to help you if you're just too tight. And then also engaging your core. So I don't want to necessarily tell you to tuck your pelvis, because tucking your pelvis too much, if you're very tight and you're keeping your legs straight, that can cause that C in your back where your whole back is kind of arched. So you want to find where's your pelvis neutral. You want a neutral pelvis. So most of us have to tuck our pelvis. I'm not going to try to say that that's not an actual thing. That's why most yoga teachers say tuck your pelvis. But you want to honestly learn your body, come into yourself and find where your pelvis feels neutral. This is kind of the place when you're sitting is like usually the best way to learn where your pelvis is neutral. Kind of play with it. You intentionally rock it forward and over exaggerate rock it back, and just kind of start slowing that movement down and find the place where you feel kind of balanced. You feel your sits bones are on the ground and your spine is kind of hitting into it, coming into it nicely. There's not like any tweaking or discomfort. You just kind of feel like you're able to rest your pelvis there. It's just something you have to play with, learn how it feels. You know, you want to think about your back being lengthened, nice and long. That's what's going to help get a nice neutral pelvis. Because you have like your curve in your back is too exaggerated in either direction, your pelvis is going to be off probably. So find that place where it feels good and then engage your core. Once you're there, engage your core. Think about your floating ribs on the side coming in and engaging, like wrapping around. Think about your pubis bone here contracting towards your navel, and that's going to help contract your lower abs. And all of that's going to have your core nice and engaged, and that's what you want in your downward dog. And in, honestly, most asana that you're doing, because you want that stability that helps you lift the weight of your body off of your grounded points. So especially for inversions, that's really ideal when you're like weight bearing on your shoulders, but even when you're doing warrior two, you want to kind of help lift yourself off of your hips, and that's going to help with that. So coming up from our ribs are stitched in, and then you're going to come to your shoulder. Shoulder is really important because you really want the names, you want flexion and you want like an external rotation. So you're, by what I'm saying by external rotation, obviously your arm's not coming like this, but when your hand is grounded, when you have the eye, like the eye or the crease of your elbow spinning forward, that's an external rotation of the shoulder. That's what the action is called. It looks like a spinning in, it doesn't matter. However you think about it, but you want to think about the crease of your elbow pointing forward, your biceps coming up, the triceps spinning in towards your ear. That's what you want. And you want full extension. So you want to be able to reach your arm up and pretty much have your arm at the line of your ear. That's what you want. That's the range of motion. This is probably the most common restriction I see in people in their downward dog, where it becomes a mistake and something that could potentially cause an issue. If you don't have that range of motion, so you can't get that nice long clean line from your hands to your hips, and you really want that line. You don't want that, you know, where you're kind of like bent here and you're not getting a line here, you're getting like more of an angle. So that's the flexibility you really want to work on, opening that up if you're not able to get that. So you want to open up your lats and stuff. You can do foam rolling, stretching. I'll link to a video for stretching on that. So set your shoulder, then your elbow. This action of spinning your elbow forward is technically happening at your shoulder, but the awareness usually comes to your elbow. So think about from your shoulder spinning to make that crease of your elbow pointing forward, and then hands are grounded. So you're thinking about using your hands the way you use feet. Think about really, you know, you have your toes, when you're standing, you have your toes grounded into the earth. You have the edges of your feet grounded, but you still have this little pocket, the arch of your foot. So you want to think about this still creates a lift, lifting from your wrist, lifting to your elbow, to your shoulder, all the way up to your hips. So you want to think about creating that lift from your hands to come all the way up. Fingertips, edges of your palm, root down for you to rise up. And common mistakes with this, I would see people's fingers are closed, or sometimes people like are gripping into the, like they're trying to claw your mat. Don't claw your mat. Be nice to your mat. Just plant into it. Yeah, I think that's pretty much about it. Common mistake with the elbows is you'll see people's elbows, you know, bending out to the side. You don't want that. Keep it in. Swing it in. You can even think about, before you go in to your downward dog. So you know what? We'll come into downward dog. If you have your mat, you can come join me. We're gonna just work on different alignment stuff first. So you're gonna come into your tabletop, just to have an idea of how things are supposed to feel. First, you're gonna come into your cow pose, where you drop your belly, lift your tailbone, lift your heart, and look up. Stay here and focus on your hips. Focus on that lifting up of your hips and how, you know, the spreading of your butt just kind of naturally happens. That's what you want. You want your hips to be like that. Not your back, but your hips are like that in your downward dog. coming back up. From here, you want to bend your elbows out, which you don't normally want to do. You want to bend them out so you can sweep your elbows in and feel how that makes you so much stronger in your upper body. So we're going to do that again. Bend your elbows out to the side, sink your chest down, sweep your elbows in towards your midline and press up. And feel that strength and stability you've just created. From here, tuck your toes, press your hips back. So you're now coming into like a crouching child's pose, stomach to your thighs. Exhale, straighten your legs, bow your head down, come into your downward dog. Drop your knees, sit onto your heels, and that's pretty. Okay, so one more time, getting into downward dog. I like coming in through child's pose. So you want to be in an extended child's pose. Look at your hands, spread your fingers nice and wide, grounding into your fingers. Relax your shoulders, but keep your arms nice and wide and spin the crease of your elbow up. Tuck your toes underneath and think about your thighs touching into your stomach as you lift your knees and keep your knees bent so your thighs are touching. Here, so you can really focus on that upper body alignment, pressing your fingertips, rolling your triceps to your ears, extending, pressing your hips back, spreading the butt, and then press the weight towards your heels. Hips come up, pressing back, engage your core, engage your ribs, pull the floating ribs in, and you can breathe. If you need to make adjustments, this is when it's like your first down dog of the day. You'll do some pedaling. You can open up your back by shifting your heels to one side or the other. But you just really want to focus on really pressing your heart towards your knees almost. Relaxing your shoulders, grounding through your whole hand and your finger pads. Pressing your hips up to lengthen the spine. Pressing your weight towards your heels. You can rock your neck onto your knees and come down. Well, hopefully you guys enjoyed that video. Hopefully it was helpful in getting to your proper alignments with your downward dog, Adho Mukha Svanasana. Again, I'll have links below the other videos. You can subscribe so you can get notified and ring the bell so you get notified when I post the other videos on this downward dog and as well as other asanas in the future.